Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Now, my guest today is a GP, general practitioner or family doctor from Lancashire, northwest of England. He's a proponent of a low carbohydrate diet. He's very much interested in reversal of chronic conditions, particularly type 2 diabetes, and of course, many others. He's an award winner. In 2016, he'll tell us more about it in a minute, but in 2016, he won an award for lifestyle medicine. And he is one of the top, he was named as one of the top most influential GPs in the UK, Dr. David Unwin. Welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Hello, everybody.
I'm delighted to have you on this channel. Dr. Unwin, I'm sure my introduction didn't do you justice. Why don't you fill in the gaps, any other information about your background?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is I have become fascinated by the actual causes of illness. And I've come to realize that for many years, I was obsessed with giving medication for illnesses, but I'd missed the most important thing, which is why is somebody ill? And maybe you can do a better job if you understand why they have this illness. And in some cases, you're actually able to reverse it. And obviously, we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes. And I think it just suffices it to say that until 2012, I hadn't done any of this work. I just looked after people and prescribed. And now I love it if I can use lifestyle medicine tailored to the patient, looking at why are they actually ill. So that's one of my enthusiasms is lifestyle medicine. The other is patient activation, where I'm really interested in, instead of doing medicine to people, I work with patients and we together have shared goals about that person's future. Because as a doctor, that's way more satisfying than doing medicine to people. And I love the work I do now. I think that's the other thing. I'm 64 and I love my job. So I've just been there today. I've seen loads of happy patients. People have changed their lives. And I find in the UK, the number of cheerful old GPs is vanishingly small. I think I'm the oldest doctor in a 50 to 60 mile radius. I must be. All my friends have retired 10 years ago now. So that's a bit more general about me there.
When you were a classically trained doctor, you weren't trained in lifestyle medicine. So what brought you to the low carbohydrate sort of space? How did you find out about the low carbohydrate?
Yeah, that's a little, well, there were several, was several threads to it. The first thread was a sense of disappointment in myself. So in 2012, I was like many other doctors. I wasn't really enjoying my work. I was exhausted and disappointed because I'd become a doctor to make a difference. And I didn't really feel I was making much of a difference. Patients are very polite, but they didn't look better for my intervention. They didn't look really well. All I'd seen was gradually, from what I'd seen of the world, people were getting sicker and sicker. They were certainly becoming fatter, and mental health was deteriorating and physical health was deteriorating. So that was quite disappointing for me, really. So I'd given decades of my life, and the population I serve seemed to be getting less well, not better. So the background was I was a bit disappointed in myself, and I was wondering about retiring and doing something else. And then a single patient changed my life and the life, arguably, of millions of other people through me. And this was a lady. I knew she wasn't taking her medication for type 2 diabetes. And in the UK, we're partly paid to check that people are taking their medication. I knew she wasn't, so I wrote to her to say I was concerned. Would you come and see me? I was in for a shock because, well, several shocks actually. The first was when she walked in, I didn't recognize her because she'd lost so much weight. She looked fabulous, and I tried to send her out of the room thinking the wrong patient had come in. The second shock was she was hopping mad. She was cross. And she was cross because she said, Dr. Unwin, you've been giving me metformin now for my diabetes for about a decade. And I haven't been taking my metformin now for months, and my blood sugar is absolutely normal. It's not even in the diabetic range. So I feel I've put my diabetes into remission without your help. And you never ever told me that rice was actually sugar, that bread is sugar, that pasta is sugar. And if you had, you could have saved me the side effects of metformin for 10 years. So I had an angry woman on my hands. And I knew I need to listen and listen fast and listen well. So I said, you know, I'm amazed. You look fabulous. Clearly, I've got something to learn. And she was the first one that mentioned to me about the low carb diet. I'd never heard of it. But the physiology of it made sense, because I did remember somewhere in my training that starch was glucose molecules holding hands, and that starchy foods digest down into sugar. So I knew she had a point. And I did feel guilty because clearly she had sorted herself out, and no thanks to me. And that was the beginning of the journey, because I discovered that there were thousands and thousands of people on social media like her, helping themselves, improving their own diabetes, and being criticized by the healthcare professionals involved. So I decided to make it up to the world for my wasted decades that I would help this group spread the message of a low carb diet helping people with type 2 diabetes. And since then, we've done television programs, radio programs. We did a BBC One documentary that went out to 4 million people. I've gone all over the world. So it's a surprising story, because I was all ready to stop work. And here I am, still here, and I've been in this afternoon, and I enjoy my work. And we've managed to roll out some of what we do around the world. And I should say now, so at that point, in 2012, I had never seen drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. I hadn't seen it a single time. And so that was the first lady, number one. And now we're at 121 people who have achieved what to me is an amazing, astonishing thing. And they're a very cheerful bunch. So we've now got 121 of them. So that's kind of where we're up to.
That's a very touching story, how one person's journeys or one person's success story can inspire hundreds and hundreds of others.
Yes, I agree. I think what's very disappointing, I think a lot of people find that they tell their doctor, oh, I've done this amazing thing. And many of the doctors are not curious. And there seems to be an absence of curiosity. Whereas I've learned late in my life that when patients do something remarkable or good, it's really cheerful to find out, well, what did you do? How did it work? Tell me more about it. And I hear this a lot on social media, that my doctor doesn't seem very interested by what I've done. I think a lot of doctors are very tired, exhausted, and fed up. I understand that. That was me.
I'm glad you mentioned the word curious. Doctors have to be curious. They have to ask the questions sometimes rather than just give prescriptions. Dr. Tro mentioned exactly the same. Said the least your doctor can do is be curious.
Yeah.
Because I was, as a type 1 diabetic, when I first started on sort of embarking on this low carbohydrate sort of journey, I did it alone. without any support. And when I slipped it from my tongue, I mentioned it to my diabetes consultant at the hospital. She actually said to me, well, you're still young. And so you're, you know, if you're considering having another baby, then you must eat carbohydrates. And of course, I came home and I tried to find evidence for that. And I couldn't find evidence. In fact, I found evidence to the contrary. And I then decided that was the first and last time I was revealing to them what I did. My blood sugars were coming down. My health was improving. I didn't have excess weight to lose, but I was just feeling generally so good. My A1C was coming down. And she gave me this false information, which actually is false. So I did it alone. I did it completely alone.
And of course, the effect of that is a loss of trust. And that's terrible. I think one of the things, so I'm actually a Royal College of General Practitioners national champion for collaborative work with patients. And so what I champion is the idea that people and their doctors work together towards shared goals. And that, you know, it's up to the clinician to try and work with the hopes of the person in front of them, the beliefs that that person has. And the results are far more cheerful and exciting. It's been an adventure for me, not to tell people, not to lecture them, but to find out what they're hoping for. So, you know, people may be hoping for drug-free remission. They may be hoping to lose weight or hoping to breathe better or all sorts of things. But if you could work with the patient, it's a lovely, rewarding form of medicine. And I'm sorry you were disappointed there, but there would have been a significant loss of trust. And then, of course, you're left alone.
I had to work out how to reduce my insulin all alone. Yeah, I still don't reveal everything to them. Like the fasting that I do, I don't even mention it. I just don't mention these things to them anymore because I'm not sure how they would respond. However, in my very last visit, that was January 2022, this year. So I was told, well, whatever you're doing well, so just keep it up. So my A1C went down to 5.7%. And I know that I can do better. So I'm working on improving that even more because for optimal optimal figure isn't 5.7 as would like to believe. And having been diabetic for 44 years now, so I don't want to be facing all the complications. And I was on a high carbohydrate diet. So
yeah, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. I think what's happening now, I do think things have changed. So when I started in January 2013, I was pretty well alone in that I didn't know any other doctors were doing this. And in fact, I was criticized for supporting people with a low carb diet. I was shouted at publicly. I got hate mail and all sorts of things. Things have changed a lot now, and social media has changed this because so many people are connected around the world and they're learning from each other. And I think increasing numbers of healthcare professionals now are meeting people who say, I've cut the carbs and I feel so much better. And I can see the difference. I do a lot of public speaking, and I can see the difference now that an audience of doctors, all of them have treated people now who've gone low carb, and then it's not regarded as weird as it was in 2013. And I think social media has the credit for that because it's spread it so much. So I hope for you that before long they'll be asking, that's really interesting. You know, what have you found? What have you done with your insulin? What have you found? That's a hope. And there are a lot of young doctors now curious. I do a lot of education, a lot of curious young doctors who are interested in lifestyle medicine.
For anyone who's just considering, who's completely new to low carbohydrate sort of concept, how would you define it? Obviously, it varies from person to person because it's very dependent on each individual's aims, goals, but also health status, right? So how would you introduce someone new to this sort of lifestyle diet? How low is low carbohydrate?
I think if you don't mind, I'd rather start with, well, why should you do it in the first place, in terms of, because I think it's more important before you get on to the details of how you do something, why should you do it? And this is what I've learned from my wife, who's a consultant psychologist. And she says it's key that people are interested and fascinated by what benefit might I get before you tell them what to do. So let's do that for the listeners and viewers today. So if we think about the hormone insulin, so insulin is an absolutely key hormone in regulating blood sugar. So when we were designed, why was insulin brought in? And insulin is brought in because you must regulate blood sugar in a small frame of safety. And so a high blood sugar over time is very dangerous. In fact, in even 6 hours, a high blood sugar is beginning to damage the lining of your arteries. And so for people with diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, time with a high blood sugar is damaging your arteries. And that's why you are so right to pursue a careful approach to your blood sugar. Because if you had poorly controlled blood sugar for 40 years, you could be facing heart disease quite easily. And so 2 things become really important. One is time in range, so trying to ensure that your blood sugar is well controlled through the day. And the other is the hemoglobin A1C, which is the blood test we do, which is the average sugariness over 3 months. So we know that if you have poorly controlled diabetes, you are losing a third of your life expectancy due to the damage to the arteries. So it becomes pretty obvious that we all need to work hard to help people have good blood sugar control. For somebody with type 1 diabetes, this becomes, it's important on a day-to-day and hour-to-hour basis, because you need to know how much insulin to use. But in terms of longevity, it's also very important for people with type 2 diabetes because of the damage to the lining of the arteries done by high blood sugar. And so that's one reason that you should be very interested in how much sugar you're eating. Because of course, one of the major things that affects your blood sugar is what you've eaten. Nearly always a high blood sugar, as I'm sure you know, is the high blood sugar is high because of something you ate. Now, it's not always what you've eaten, because steroids can put up blood sugar and stress can. But for most people, a high blood sugar is what you ate. But then we come to some broader aspects. So high blood sugars also affect your immune system. It affects your blood pressure. For some people, it affects their mental health. So it isn't just for diabetes that you might consider a lower carb approach. So that leads us now into, so that's why medically it might be beneficial. You might improve your blood pressure. You might improve your weight. Particularly, you might get rid of a big tummy. You might improve your diabetic control. Or for some people, there's increasing interest in mental health. And people are talking about keto improving anxiety and bipolar disorder. So it's a really exciting area. But now we come to the actual question that you asked. So in research terms, a low carb diet is less than 130 grams of carbohydrate per day. As a clinician, I don't really talk about 130 grams of carbohydrate very often, because my patients don't think in terms of grams. I'm getting them to turn the starchy white foods green, so that you would replace bread, rice, potatoes, maybe with more green veg. You've also got to, of course, eliminate sugar itself. Mm-hmm. And that leads to an emphasis on green leafy veg, more protein and less carbohydrate. And that's what I'm doing for my patients.
Interesting that you don't get them to count carbohydrates.
No, or weigh. I don't. I think of family life. I'm not sure that weighing your food and counting fits in well with all of the stress of family life. And the mother is there and dad's there and whoever. And so I'm trying to get an emphasis on healthy whole foods and away from counting, weighing, measuring. And so some of my patients like to do that, and I will help them. But a lot of them just start having more protein, more green veg, cutting out the starchy stuff and the sugary stuff. And for many of them, that's good enough. They lose weight, their blood pressure improves, and their blood is less sugary. So for many of them, I'm not counting stuff. I'm not very enthusiastic about that.
That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. And I can relate to it as a type 1 diabetic, because I can't remember how long, for good 22 years, when carbohydrate counting and matching insulin to carbs came about. I remember it was the year 2000 when I lived in Cambridge at the time. I went on the first course of carbohydrate counting, and it was useful to know how many carbs you're eating. But now I know that it wasn't accurate. Now we know it's not accurate because because it's just someone said it, I think on my channel, that it's at best it's just estimates. So the amount of fiber and
in any case.
And so it's not accurate, and you can never replicate a real working pancreas and match your insulin perfectly, the timing and the dose to the carbs you're eating. So now I do not count carbohydrates, and I'm in a healthier place because I just don't eat the pasta and the bread and even fruits I don't eat. So I don't need to count carbohydrates. I just take a bolus to cover my meal, and my meal will be protein based, for which I still need some insulin, but that's about it. I just eyeball it and I get it right every single time. That's it. No counting carbohydrates. And it's just such a relief.
It's more relaxing, unless, it's just you want to get on with your life. You're hoping that the diabetes doesn't interfere with your life. And it's ironic now, you could say, well, there's two ways to do this. One is there are people who say, I want to eat whatever I want to eat because they don't want the diabetes to interfere with their lives. That's a very short-termism because, well, you can do that for a while, but you probably become sick because of all the sugar you consume. And later on, losing your vision, or all of the things that can happen with poor blood sugar control. So there's this idea that I want to be, live a normal life. For me, the normal life is not centered around what I eat, but the normal life is centered around my actual health, my vision, my energy, how I age. I think that's far more key than being allowed to eat ice cream anytime I want, because I think that's just foolish, really. And another thing I meant to say is, I think a lot of people don't realize that there are many foods you can eat that don't put up your blood sugar. So for me, I know that a steak and broccoli, if I'm wearing a Freestyle Libre that's monitoring my blood sugar, there will hardly be any increase in my blood sugar. So there are some delicious foods I can eat that don't put up my blood sugar. And then, it's a pity not to eat Christmas cake, but I've done it now. So I have been myself in nutritional ketosis, low carb. So that's from 2013. So I'm just nearly at 10 years now.
And after a while, you don't even miss these things. I mean, I don't even crave pasta and cakes. I mean, of course, there are people who would, but a lot of people also are like me. You get used to not eating them, and then you just lose your taste for them.
I agree. And I think one of the things that happens is your taste buds, if you can keep away from sweetness particularly, your taste buds recalibrate. So that for me, red wine now is a very sweet drink. Milk, even a small amount of milk in tea, tastes very sweet. And so all sorts of foods, my taste buds are far more active. And you may have found something similar, than they were before. So I taste food in a very different way. And I appreciate that because in a way, I enjoy my food more, I think, now.
True. Yes, I relate to that too. Dr. Unwin, why don't we talk now about your very famous, internationally known sugar infographics? I will put the links below, and these sugar infographics, which Dr. Unwin will tell you more about in a minute, but they you can access them in 17 languages at the moment. So I am going to put the link below. So choose the language that you understand the best and check them out. You must check them out. Tell us more about the sugar infographic.
I will. Yes. So I was looking really for a quick way to help people understand the sort of blood sugar consequences of different foods. And for a while, of course, we've all heard of the low GI diet, and that stands for glycemic index. So I was trying to explain to patients about the glycemic index. But I found that I only have 10-minute appointments, and it was taking too long, and it was too mystifying. And it confused my patients for two reasons. The glycemic index and the glycemic load results in grams of glucose. And my patients do not cook in grams. They don't know what 4 grams looks like or 10 grams. And also they don't cook with glucose. So they're not familiar with what, so telling people the result in grams of glucose wasn't useful. So I wanted to find a way that my patients of all ages and backgrounds could understand the consequences of common foods in terms of their blood sugar. Mm-hmm. So I found an expert on the glycemic index called Dr. Jeffrey Leavesey. I had an idea, which was, could we convert the glycemic load of common foods into something my patients do understand, which is 4-gram teaspoons of sugar. Mm-hmm. So a teaspoon of sugar weighs about 4 grams. So we then did the equivalent. So I think the single fact that has gone around the world, definitely millions of times, is that a small bowl of boiled rice can be expected to affect your blood sugar to approximately the same extent as 10 teaspoons of sugar. And I think that single fact has helped more people than anything else I ever did, because it's social media is alive with it. There are many more. So these teaspoon of sugar equivalents cover food. So a banana is approximately equal to 5 teaspoons of sugar. A bowl of potato is, I think, 9 teaspoons of sugar.
Oranges.
Yes, or oranges are very sugary, or even worse, a glass of orange juice is probably equivalent to 8 teaspoons of sugar. A handful of raisins is 12 teaspoons of sugar. So there are, I'd say the infographics cover many different foods. There are 7 or 8 infographics now. And as you said, they're in 17 languages, all the way from Russian, Chinese, Malaysian, all sorts of languages. And they're available free of charge, free of copyright it's a charity that I support called the Public Health Collaboration in the UK. So anybody can download the diet sheet I use there. The low carb protocol is there, and the teaspoon of sugar equivalents, all there free of charge.
It's just an excellent way. I've used your infographics with some of the people I coach, and it's so relatable to whatever culture or background you come from. A teaspoon of sugar is relatable to all. It's such an easy and, in fact, exciting way and engaging for patients to find out. But then they go, oh, do you have another one on the fruits? Do you have another one on this and that?
Yeah, there's lots on fruits and vegetables, breakfast cereals, brown. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what's the difference between brown rice and white rice, or brown spaghetti and white spaghetti? That's all there as well. The differences between milk chocolate and dark chocolate is there. So anyway, have a look. It's there.
And whole wheat bread, and compared to just normal sort of white bread.
So yeah, a single slice of whole wheat bread is the same as 3 teaspoons of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And probably if you monitor your blood sugar, you're probably aware of that yourself. Yeah, I thought so.
Oh, you can see the direct impact of
Yes.
bread and
Yes.
pasta. So I wear a CGM, obviously. So
Yeah,
my diet
just to interrupt, you know, I think in the future, so at the moment, the CGM continuous glucose devices are available to people with type 1 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
I think the future is those same devices for people with type 2 diabetes. And in fact, I'm encouraging my patients with type 2 diabetes to consider buying, for educational purposes, maybe just for a few weeks, the Freestyle Libre, because you learn so much so rapidly, good lessons. And surely it must come that across the world we start using glucose monitoring for people with type 2 diabetes as well.
Or even for it's very effective.
Better still.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and in fact, that brings me to another subject. So I know, so at Norwood Avenue, where I'm a doctor, for the people that go low carb with type 2 diabetes, 50% of them will achieve drug-free remission. So of all the ones at Norwood Avenue who go low carb, half of them will benefit and get a drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. But if you look at the people with pre-diabetes who go low carb, about 94% of those get a normal blood sugar, and because their disease is less established, they are much easier. And I hardly ever let one through. Hardly any of them ever become diabetic because 95%, 94% of them, I've published on this, and their disease isn't as dug in. And so that's a pre-diabetes. Well done for mentioning that. It's a real opportunity to help people.
That brings me to my next question. In fact, it's probably more of a comment than anything else, but probably a very small minority of your patients don't find success with a low carbohydrate lifestyle not because they are reluctant, but because they have considerable behavioral issues with regards to food, so food addictions, etc.
Yes.
This is a subject I have covered on my channel with Dr. David Unwin's wife, clinical psychologist, Dr. Jen Unwin. I am going to put the link to that video below as well. Please check it out. She gave in fact, it was very informative, and she gave some tips on how people can help themselves if they don't have access to group therapies, etc., how they can help themselves. They're all doable, achievable tips. And she also mentioned, in fact, she gave a list of foods that seem to trigger people, and they are not just the carbohydrate. So there are some foods in that list which trigger the addictive sort of nature in people. So she said, well, if you're triggered by these foods, eliminate them from your house. Don't have them in the cupboard. So please do check that video out. Okay, so
I would just like to add something to that, actually, about how we came across this. So I was, again, curious, because when you have intelligent people who repeatedly do something that harms their health, you really have to ask why. And of course, I'd met intelligent people who harmed their health before. So that's people with an alcohol problem. Or what about cigarettes? These are intelligent people who, you know, there's nobody left in the world who doesn't know that cigarettes cause cancer. And yet quite a few people are still smoking. And we suddenly saw that actually this applied to people with junk food and carbohydrate, that they've got a weight problem, and there they are eating Doritos or, you know, all sorts of what they know is wrong. And if you are somebody who keeps, you know, if you're an intelligent person and you keep doing something that can work against your health, you need to ask why. And I have come to understand that food addiction is a common problem and a huge problem. And unfortunately, doctors are not equipped to deal with this. They've no idea how to help. And of course, that leads any viewers into watching Jen's video expert on that. But we have part of the very good results we get at Norwood Avenue is because we do help our patients with food addiction to find out what are their trigger foods, because you need to know what it is, and then moderation will not work. You know, if you're an addict, you can't manage half a glass of whiskey or half a cigarette, and the same can apply to all sorts of foods. So I just wanted to add that, if you don't mind.
Oh, thanks for adding that. Right. Okay. So let's go back to diabetes type 2. When you mentioned that the newly diagnosed patients have greater or higher rate of success.
Yes.
So why do you think that is? If the disease isn't established long enough, if you've just been diagnosed, you have more of a chance to put your disease in remission.
Yes, I don't think I've quite covered that. I'll just flesh that out a bit. So we started looking at the database at Norwood Avenue, and we discovered that when we suggest a low carb approach to somebody who's had diabetes for less than a year, they've got a 76% chance of remission. And the longer they've had diabetes, the less likely they are to achieve remission. And it seems as if this isn't about chronological age. So the oldest person with remission is 92. So it doesn't matter if you're an old person or a young person, but it has more of an effect. It seems as if diabetes ages your metabolism. And the longer you've had type 2 diabetes, the less likely you are to get into remission. But it's very important that we also deal with something else, which is mitigation. So the other thing I've discovered is that if you have very poorly controlled diabetes, a high hemoglobin A1C, a high average sugariness to your blood, then those are the very people who get the greatest improvements in their hemoglobin A1C, the ones with worse control. So they're less likely to get remission, but they are likely to see some highly significant improvements in blood sugar and may well be able to, with the help of their prescriber, cut back on medication. So low carb can help across the board, but for remission, it's more likely if we get it early. And so there's a window of opportunity with type 2 diabetes. Later on, we're aiming for mitigation.
Okay, so you were using the word remission, and some other professionals use the word reversal, and people are getting confused, I think, at this point, because I've had both words used. Are they the same thing? What are we talking about? What's the difference, and which one is a better word?
Right. So that's a very great point. Been a lot of confusion. Now, last year, there was an international consensus paper published to try and put a stop to all of this. And we have now an international definition of type 2 diabetes remission. And the definition is that you will have a blood sugar in the non-diabetic range for 3 months or more, not using any drugs for diabetes. And that's the definition. And the reason that I support that and the word remission is we all need to be reminded that if we go back to the way we ate before, it's only remission. The vulnerability to diabetes is there and it will come back. So if you go back to how you ate before and you put on weight, it is likely, and I have seen this many, many times, people in remission who go on holiday, or they're a carb addict, or Christmas, or whatever. One of these, the worst offenders are these cheap holidays where you bought all your food in advance, and then they feed you junk in large quantities, and then people's appetite ramps up. I'm always seeing these. And then, of course, the diabetes is back, and sometimes worse than before. So I have come to think that remission is a useful reminder to all of us, the need for vigilance and ongoing care, really. So I think remission is one thing, but the second is how are you supported to keep that remission going? How do we manage maintenance? And I think that's a challenge across the world, is helping people to stay on course, because the world is obesogenic and full of junk food. And there's always somebody who's a junk food pusher. It's the birthday, it's whatever, I've, baked a cake. And it's very difficult, very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand. That's a great point, great explanation. I love the word remission as well, because reversal can give that false sense of security to people. I think when you tell them, oh, you've reversed your diabetes, then
Yes.
they may assume that they've also reversed their predisposition to diabetes. So
yes, exactly.
the risk is gone. The risk doesn't go away. The risk is there.
No, there is. I can explain, if you're interested, as to why some people are still using the word reversal, and correctly. And this comes from the work of Professor Roy Taylor at Newcastle University. He's he's a giant in the diabetes world, and he showed that if you lose weight and your pancreas empties of fat, you can actually improve the function of the pancreas gland. And that those people, while the fat is absent from the pancreas, have a better response to a sugary food than they would have done before they lost the weight. And so that temporarily they have truly achieved reversal, in that they can have a bowl of rice without it putting up the blood sugar. But I would say that is temporary, because if you then go on to have so much rice that you get the fat back, and the fat is in the pancreas, then you're back where you started. But there are people who use the word reversal correctly, but I think it's far too risky a concept and just causes confusion, and I stop using it.
Thank you for that explanation. Dr. Unwin, shall we talk about salt? That's one of your favorite topics.
It is.
So salt,
Heavens.
we've blamed salt for decades. For decades, salt is the enemy. Yes. Salt is poison. I never knew that salt was one of the most sort of important minerals that we all need. I never knew that about salt. So as a diabetic, I was told to just not, reduce salt intake, which I did. But of course, it had no impact on my A1C. I was never told to reduce carbohydrates or sugar, but I was told to reduce salt to keep blood pressure in control, which it always was, I have to say. But let's talk about salt.
Yeah. So what I'm about to tell you now has all been published. And if you Google Unwin and blood pressure and low carb, there is a paper that I've written on this with a professor of cardiology. So anybody interested to learn far more, it's all there in that paper. And so I'll tell this as a story, really, because I spent years confused. So what confused me was, when I went low carb myself, I went from having moderately raised blood pressure, about 160 over 92, something like that, to 124 over 70. And in fact, my blood pressure was so much improved, I found if I stood up too quickly, I felt dizzy and had to hang on to my desk. And I was astonished when I took my blood pressure that it was low blood pressure. I couldn't understand that. And then all the patients were finding the same, so much so that I was reducing blood pressure medication in every clinic because they weren't needing the drugs they had been prescribed by me before. So their blood pressure was improving. That was the first mystery. The second mystery was that I found personally an increase in muscle cramps, partly because I'm a runner and I take a lot of exercise. And the only way to solve this was have more salt. So I had to start having more salt in my diet to get rid of the muscle cramps. And at the same time, the blood pressure didn't go up. So that was weird because I was anxious about all this salt. And I thought, well, surely it's going to put my blood pressure. It never did. And nor the same, the patients, the early patients found exactly the same. They were all on more salt and the blood pressure remained good. And then the third mystery was that I found that people, when they first go low carb, start passing a lot of urine. So that I had people who'd had swollen ankles for years and that I'd been using drugs for. And then they'd say, well, I stopped using those drugs because I don't need them because my ankles are great now. And abdominal bloating has gone as well. I couldn't understand these three things. The idea that patients who are low carb could have more salt, the idea that the blood pressure would improve, and the odd idea that they seem to pass more urine. And it took me, I forget now, probably about 3 or maybe 4 years to get to the bottom of all of this. And I now know. So actually, we've all known since 1932 that insulin causes the kidneys to hoard salt. So a high carb diet, it's a high insulin diet, means your body doesn't weigh out the salt it ought to. And you start hoarding salt, and fluid follows salt. And that's how you get bloating, swollen ankles, and also it puts your blood pressure up. But then, of course, when you put this into reverse and you go low carb, which is low insulin, then you start weeing out more urine, taking the salt with it. Blood pressure improves. So we've, in many cases, I feel, we blame the salt for what the sugar actually did. And that's a very popular lecture that I give all over the world about we blame the salt for what the sugar did. And what a revelation for me. And to know that this had been known for, 90 years. And there's been a lot of follow-up studies, all of which are in the paper if you look it up. So how interesting. And so one of the things I would say to people who go low carb is you should buy yourself a blood pressure machine and see, because your blood pressure may be going to improve. And if you're on medication, you may be able to ask your prescriber, is this the right dosage? Should I reduce my dose of drugs? Had you heard this before?
I've listened to all your podcasts, Dr. Unwin. But it's fascinating, and I think one of the first things that people assume is damaging their kidneys, of course, is
I ought to cover that. You're quite right. Yes. So
and protein,
yes,
meat
you're absolutely right.
Kidneys. Where does that?
So that happened in one of the meetings that I was giving a talk in another country, and a senior dietitian got up and she said, why aren't you worried about kidney function? Because you're advocating all this protein. And it was Jen who said, well, why don't you look on the database to find out what's happening to the kidney function of our patients? And that's the basis of the last paper I published. And so you can Google that as well. If you Google renal function and Unwin, and that's been written with Professor Wong, a nephrologist. What we discovered was that the patients who went low carb, even though they were having more protein, had improved kidney function. It did exactly the opposite of what you would have expected. And so that it seems that, at least for my patients, the kidney function improved significantly. And so thank you for pointing that out, because that's the last paper that I published, which was so reassuring.
So kidney function improves if you lower your insulin, despite the fact that you may be consuming more salt.
Yes.
So
I think because one of the most damaging things for your kidneys is a high blood sugar. So I actually think, if I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk that a high blood sugar damages your circulation and the lining of your arteries, well, a high blood sugar also damages the blood flow to your kidneys. And I think that is why people with diabetes, one of the greatest risks they have is deteriorating renal function. And good blood sugar control is key to maintaining renal kidney health. And that's why our patients who have very much better diabetic control have improved renal function. So so also over the years, the number of organs. So at the beginning, I wrote a paper on the liver, because the liver liver function was improving significantly. So that was that was a paper in 2015. And then I thought, well, blood pressure. So that was another paper. And then kidney function. So that was another paper. And so it seems, lipid function as well. People worry that their cholesterol will go sky high because they're eating more dairy and eggs and so on. And that hasn't been true for my patients. That's another paper. So it's kept me very busy in the last 10 years.
Dr. Unwin, you've been very busy. I can't even catch up with all your podcasts now. So
Yeah.
I've got a few of them now on my watch later list. So, but I will watch all of them. I try and watch everything you put out. But let's go back to, okay, so we covered kidney function improves, fatty liver disease. So many people seem to be suffering fatty liver disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. These people aren't alcohol drinkers. What's happening there? What's the mechanism? And how is it that their liver function is improving on the low carbohydrate diet?
Thank you. That's such an important point. So we were talking before about insulin. So insulin has the vital job of reducing blood sugar, because a high blood sugar damages your arteries. So the question is, where does that sugar go? So insulin has to get rid of sugar, and it does this by pushing the sugar inside your cells. So it pushes the sugar inside your muscles for energy to run around. But what if you eat more Mars bars and rice cakes or whatever, then you need to run around? What happens to that extra sugar? Some of it gets pushed into your belly fat to give you a bigger tummy and middle-age spread. But the rest gets pushed into your liver. And the only thing the liver can do with that sugar is turn it into a fat called triglyceride. And so we now have a situation where a quarter of the developed world, a quarter of everybody we know in the developed world has non-alcoholic fatty liver. So it's not that they're alcoholics. It's just that they're having more carbohydrate than their body can cope with. And the liver is turning this sugar into fat. And that's why it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And the reason it's called disease is the fat in the liver starts interfering with the good work of insulin. And Roy Taylor talks about the long silent scream from the liver of about 10 years. And that's because fatty liver is leading into diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So people have fatty liver usually before they have type 2 diabetes. And so it is something that we should worry about and we should do something about. But I hope you can understand from what I've explained that all of this wonderfully is reversible, and rapidly so. So if you cut back on the carbohydrate, then your body uses up the fat that was in your liver, can burn it. And I've known fatty liver reverse easily within 2 months regularly, and liver function to really improve. And I think what's worrying, and I love Robert Lustig's work on this. Have you managed to ask him on your podcast yet? Have you had him?
Not yet.
We live in hope.
I will.
Yeah, inshallah for that one. Because he, of course, is distressed because we now have children with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because of the amount of particularly sugar-sweetened beverages. And so this is an international crisis that our children, and the youngest I've seen type 2 diabetes is in a 12-year-old. And that is a catastrophe and very serious. And so fatty liver disease, you're right to ask about it. There isn't nearly enough curiosity about fatty liver disease and not nearly enough action. And I think a lot of doctors keep hoping there'll be a drug to solve it. And yet, of course, the reason is we're all having too much junk food, too much carbohydrate and sugar. And if we ate, so fatty liver disease was rare. Diabetes was rare 50 years ago, incredibly rare. And if only we'd go back to eating less snacking, eating less often, eating less in quantity and more in quality, so many of these chronic diseases do not have to happen, and they shouldn't happen. And I think thinking about children gives this a real focus and impetus that we must do something. for the younger generation. And that's another one of the things that keeps me going.
The explanation about the liver fat, is this the reason then why triglycerides also go down when people adopt the low carbohydrate diet?
Yeah, excellent point. That's a great point. So the idea of people's lipid profiles is wider than just cholesterol. So when I don't just measure cholesterol for my patients, I measure what we call a fasting lipid profile. And that is cholesterol of different types, but also importantly, triglyceride, because triglyceride is a fat in your blood, which is in my opinion, triglyceride is a better predictor of heart disease than cholesterol itself. And I find that for people who go low carb, on average, the triglyceride, which is a fat in the blood, is improving by at least a third on average. I've seen some amazing results. And this is partly, now you can understand, triglyceride's going to go down because on the whole, triglyceride is sugar that you ate a little while ago. If you eat less sugar, then the triglycerides improve significantly without drugs in my practice.
Dr. Unwin, let's talk about medications. I mean, especially for people who are on a number of drugs for so-called chronic conditions, which we now know are reversible through lifestyle changes or dietary changes. And yet these people are given medications lifelong without understanding the side effects of some of those medications. I mean, let's start with the most, or what people think is harmless. They take it almost like candy, as the Americans would say. So acid reflux medication. I was given them 20 years ago when I was in my early 20s. And of course, the reason I had acid reflux, which I haven't had since I adopted low carbohydrate diet, was because my glycemia was high blood sugars. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit to be said about medication. The first thing is there are no effective medications that don't have both pros and cons. And the decision-making process is to weigh up for the person in front of you the pros and the cons. And if you don't know, if you never discuss side effects, then how is the patient to know whether this is a good idea or a bad idea? And so it's always worth asking doctors or prescribers, what are the common side effects of this so that you know, and are there alternatives? Do I have to take the medication, or could I make a change to my lifestyle? Another thing we must cover is people who are already on medication, because you've got to be careful if, for instance, as you know, you couldn't possibly stop your insulin because you need insulin to live. But there are other medications which you couldn't just go low carb and stop your medication. And so I would say for people on medication for the diabetes, prescribed medication, they would be well advised to discuss going low carb with a prescriber. And actually there is another paper which you can print out and take with you to the consultation. So if you Google, it's published in the British Journal of General Practice. And so I'm one of the, so it's Google, BJGP, Unwin, and Murdoch. And you'll find that there is a paper on that with which medications are safe with low carb, which need care. And you could always then discuss that with the prescriber if you are hoping to cut back on medication. And that would guide the process and indicate to your doctor that there are other doctors who are doing this, and keep it safe. But yes, certainly in my own practice, what I find is that most people would rather avoid lifelong medications if you give them the chance. And I call that my golden opportunity, which is, would you like to start metformin for your diabetes today, or are you interested in an alternative? And many people are very interested to avoid medication. And I wish I'd done more of that as a younger doctor and not prescribed as many medications as I did. I think you need to look at the pros and the cons.
I will put all those links below in the description below the video. However, for my audience, I have interviewed Dr. Murdoch, Campbell Murdoch.
Oh, yes, he's lovely, isn't he? Yes, so full of enthusiasm.
Is he the one that wrote the paper with you?
Yeah. Yes, he and I wrote that. Campbell and I are friends, and he's full of a young guy, full of enthusiasm. There were other people who wrote the paper as well, but yes, Campbell Murdoch, you're right, that's the one.
I've interviewed him, and he mentioned in the interview this paper, specific paper that is targeted to physicians,
yes.
Advising them on how to de-prescribe.
Yes, that's right. But all of the papers, what we've done is our charity, the Public Health Collaboration, of which Campbell is also a member, funds the open access of these papers so that the general public can also download and read the papers or print them off and take them to their physician.
Dr. Unwin, I think what we can take out of this conversation is, I'm paraphrasing you, in fact, is that sugar is poison to your metabolic health.
Yeah,
I don't elaborate on that.
Well, yes. Well, that's how I see it. And the point is this, that there is no need to have sugar in your diet. You don't have to have, it's not an essential nutrient. So we do need, there are essential fatty acids, there are essential amino acids. So there are fats that are essential, protein is essential, vitamins and minerals are essential. But starchy carbs, although they're a source of energy, you can also burn fat. And so sugar is not essential. And I quite like the idea that type 2 diabetes is a state of carbohydrate intolerance. Mm-hmm. So I can't personally, I struggle to burn carbohydrate. So why would I have something that's poisonous to me? Why would I have something that's going to make it difficult to keep my arteries healthy? And that, I think, is a good focus for people who want to stay healthy that have type 2 diabetes, to think very carefully about what they're eating, because it can make a big difference.
I can't add anything to that. That was a very, I think, a good message, a poignant message, I think, for anyone who's still thinking, is this for me? Is this low carbohydrate diet for me? Okay, so Dr. Unwin, I can't thank you enough for your time today.
You're so welcome. I hope people found that interesting, and well done to you for running this site. Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.